Really good to see you here. In 2008, the Summer Olympics in Beijing, something remarkable happened, and it wasn't a good thing, but it was something that was very shocking to many people who were watching and who were attending. During the track and field events, the U.S. men's 400-meter relay team and the women's 400-meter relay team both dropped the baton during that event and were thus disqualified. Of course, the U.S. was expected to place very highly, if not win those events, competing at a very high level, but simply because they didn't make the transfer with the baton properly, they dropped it, they were disqualified, and that ended all of their hopes. They had trained for 4 years for this. It was kind of heartbreaking to watch. But it doesn't, and the people who were running in the event many times were some of the fastest runners on the team, the ones who had done, the sprints, and they had won, world championships and all of this. But no matter how fast they were, the handoff was the most important part of that particular event. Well, in 1 Kings chapter 2, David, after reigning for 40 years, was handing off the kingdom to his son Solomon. He knew that his time on earth was nearly over, and he was preparing his son Solomon to take over as king after he died. Now, with the kings of Israel, we start off with Saul, who was the first king, and he was a bad king, just to put it bluntly. David, overall, despite some big mistakes and personal failings, David was by and large a good king. So Israel had two choices before it. After David's reign, they could continue in the prosperity that David had brought to them, under God's leadership, of course, or they could fall back into bad leadership as they had under Saul. So it was a time of transition, and it was important how that transition occurred. David knew that he was dying, but he had left some unfinished business, and that's going to figure in very importantly to this transition. What we're going to be looking at tonight as we look through the 2nd chapter of 1 Kings and some supporting passages relating to it is the fact that Solomon's kingdom was established in death in several ways. Well, in a similar way, the kingdom of Christ was also established through death. So we might see some crossover and some lessons for both. Learning about how Solomon's kingdom started may help us to learn how better to serve our King of Kings, Jesus Christ. David had said to Solomon his son that he knew that he was going all the way of the earth. Going the way of all the earth, knowing that his natural, physical, earthly life was coming to an end. So let's begin this evening in 1 Kings chapter 2. If you haven't turned there, go ahead. We'll be planting firmly there this evening. 1 Kings chapter 2. David gives some final words of guidance to his son Solomon. Now the days of David drew near that he should die, and he charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and prove yourself a man. That's the way the New King James renders that. David had some loose ends that he still needed to take care of here. One of those loose ends that he wanted to make sure was taken care of was a man named Joab. Now, Joab had been a very important figure in David's life. He had been a very staunch ally and supporter of David, but he had also gone a little too far in a couple of instances. Down in verse 5, as Solomon again is receiving these instructions from David as he's preparing to pass on, he says, Moreover, you know also what Joab the son of Zeruiah did to me, and what he did to the 2 commanders of the armies of Israel, to Abner the son of Ner, and to Amasa the son of Jether, whom he killed. And he shed the blood of war in peacetime, and put the blood of war on his belt that was around his waist, and on his sandals that were on his feet. Therefore do according to your wisdom, and do not let his gray hair go down to the grave in peace. He's saying, Solomon, don't let this man die peacefully in his bed. He had proved himself to be a man of violence, indeed a murderer. No bones about it. If you were to look over in 2 Samuel chapter 3, you'd see the events that David is talking about. He murdered Abner. Abner had been the general under Saul when Saul was chasing after David and had tried to capture him and kill him. But after Saul died and David was finally recognized as the king, Abner really was just saying, I was just following orders. And he came later and asked for David's forgiveness in this, and he granted it. But Joab was the commander of David's armies, and he made a false claim of truce. He told Abner, he said, we're going to have a meeting, no weapons, it's a peace meeting, we're going to claim a truce here. And he wanted Abner to come and talk about how they were going to proceed from there. Abner, in the course of the chasing after David and in the battles, had killed Joab's brother. So when Abner comes to meet with Joab, Joab flips out a knife and stabs him and kills him. Now, he seems to think that he was doing David a service by killing Abner, who had been an enemy to David at one time. But this was nothing more than just pure revenge for killing his brother. And that's apparent in 2 Samuel chapter 3. 2 Samuel chapter 3 and verse 30. That's apparent why his motive for that was simply revenge. So he killed Abner. He also killed a man named Amasa. Amasa was a man who had been set as a general over the army of Israel when Absalom, David's son, had taken power. And again, Joab seems to have think that he was doing David a service by killing this enemy as well. But long after the battles had ended, there was no conflict in David's mind. Again, Amasa seems to have simply been doing what the king had commanded him to do, even though Absalom was acting as king at that time. But Joab had a similar type of deceit, tricked him, and killed him in cold blood as well. We see that he is later punished for this. If we go down to verse 28, 1 Kings chapter 2. Then the news came to Joab, for Joab had defected to Adonijah, another son of David who was a rival to Solomon and to David himself, though he had not defected to Absalom. So Joab fled to the tabernacle of the Lord and took hold of the horns of the altar. This was a way that people would flee to the altar and grab the horns of the altar, the corners of it, and they would not be permitted to be killed. But King Solomon was told, Joab has fled to the tabernacle of the Lord. There he is, by the altar. Then Solomon sent Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, saying, go and strike him down. So the horns of the altar didn't save Joab. He was killed. The murderer was finally punished for his crimes. And David was upset about this, and he had told Solomon, watch out for Joab, and you need to make sure this is taken care of, because it had reflected badly upon David himself. In verse 32, chapter 2, so the Lord will return his blood on his head, because he struck down two men more righteous and better than he, and killed them with the sword, Abner the son of Ner, the commander of the army of Israel, and Amasa the son of Jethro, the commander of the army of Judah, though my father David did not know it. This is Solomon speaking here. David didn't know that Joab did this, or that he was going to do it. Their blood shall therefore return upon the head of Joab and upon his descendants forever. But upon David and his descendants, upon his house and his throne, there shall be peace forever from the Lord. So this wasn't going to be held against David. It reflected badly upon him, but now it's been taken care of. So as Solomon is moving into his role as king, this is something that has to be taken care of, this man Joab. There was another man named Shimei that David warns Solomon about, back in verse 8. And see, you have with you Shimei, the son of Gera, a Benjamite from Bahurim, who cursed me with a malicious curse in the day when I went down to Mahanaim. But he came down to me at the Jordan, and I swore to him by the Lord, saying, I will not put you to death with the sword. So this man Shimei, when Absalom usurped the throne, David was basically chased out of Jerusalem, and as he's fleeing, this man named Shimei is seeing him go and is hurling insults at him. He was a supporter of Absalom. And he said, David, you're getting just what's due to you. And he was cursing the king. And some of the soldiers said, let me go kill this man. And David said, no, he's only speaking the truth. God has left me. Because of my sin, my failings, God has brought this punishment on me. He's only speaking the truth. So he didn't allow the soldiers to kill him. And later, after David returned to the throne, Shimei came and said, you remember what I said back there? Sorry about that. I didn't really mean that. And David forgave him. And he didn't kill him. But in verse 9 of chapter 2 of 1 Kings, David tells Solomon, now therefore do not hold him guiltless. For you are a wise man and know what you ought to do to him. But bring his gray hair down to the grave with blood. David is saying, keep an eye on this guy. And I told him that I wouldn't kill him. But that doesn't mean that you can't. And maybe you should. But he's going to leave that in Solomon's hands. And David had been humbled enough to allow this man to live, and he had accepted that cursing. But what he was really doing was this man Shimei was rejecting God's anointed king, David. But he made an oath. After Solomon came to power, after David died, you see later on, over here in chapter 2 of 1 Kings in verse 36. Then the king sent and called for Shimei and said to him, Build yourself a house in Jerusalem and dwell there, and do not go out from there anywhere. For it shall be on the day that you go out and cross the brook Kidron, know for certain that you shall surely die. Your blood shall be on your own head. And Shimei said to the king, the saying is good, as my lord the king has said, so your servant will do. So Shimei dwelt in Jerusalem many days. So Solomon said, I'm not going to kill you, I'll let you live, but you're going to be under house arrest in Jerusalem. And Shimei said, oh, thank you, no problem. Sounds good to me. And he made this oath, and yet we see that after a period of about 3 years, he had some slaves run away, so he needed to go and chase them down, so he leaves Jerusalem, thinking maybe Solomon had forgotten about the rules of the agreement, or maybe the anger of the king has cooled by now and I can just kind of do what I want. But he dies because of his willfulness, either his determined rebellion or simply just forgot about it maybe. Either way, in verse 41, Solomon was told that Shimei had gone from Jerusalem to Gath and had come back. And the king sent and called for Shimei and said to him, did I not make you swear by the Lord and warn you, saying, know for certain that on the day you go out and travel anywhere you shall surely die? And you said to me, the word I have heard is good. Why then have you not kept the oath of the Lord and the commandment which I gave you? The king said, moreover to Shimei, you know, as your heart acknowledges all the wickedness that you did to my father David, therefore the Lord will return your wickedness on your own head. And he's killed. He broke his oath, the oath that he had made before God, and therefore he forfeited the mercy that he had been extended. So Joab and Shimei were two of David's loose ends that Solomon needed to tie up, and there was one more. There was Solomon's own brother, Adonijah, yet another son of David, who had tried to take the throne for himself, but he was pretty sneaky about it. In verse 13, all of this is while David is nearing the end of his life. Solomon's being prepared to be the king. Everybody knows this. Adonijah was older than Solomon, the indication we get, and he thought he was going to be king. But Adonijah goes and talks to Bathsheba, which is the mother of Solomon. In verse 13 of 2 Kings 2, now Adonijah, the son of Haggith, came to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon. So she said, do you come peaceably? And he said, peaceably. She said, this is a rival to my son. Is he coming here to kill me, to hurt me, or kidnap me, or what? And he said, no, I've just come to talk. Moreover, he said, I have something to say to you. And she said, say it. Then he said, you know that the kingdom was mine, and all Israel had set their expectations on me. Not exactly true, Adonijah, but go ahead. They thought that I should reign. However, the kingdom has been turned over and has become my brother's, for it was his from the Lord. Now I ask one petition of you, and do not deny me. And she said to him, Say it. Then he said, Please speak to King Solomon, for he will not refuse you, that he may give me Abishag the Shunammite as wife. So Bathsheba said, Very well, I will speak to you for the king. Now, Abishag was the concubine of David. It's kind of creepy for him to ask for his father's concubine, and to our modern understanding. But it's not just creepy. It's very clever, because if he can get the old king's concubine, that is a connection between Adonijah and David, and it will undermine, perhaps in some way, in the minds of Israel, support for Solomon. Bathsheba's no fool. She knows exactly what Adonijah is doing. So she goes and tells Solomon what has occurred. And Solomon is not happy, because he also is no fool and knows exactly what this is all about. So in verse 23, Then King Solomon swore by the Lord, saying, May God do so to me, and more also, if Adonijah has not spoken this word against his own life. Now therefore, as the Lord lives, who has confirmed me and set me on the throne of David my father, and who has established a house for me as he promised, Adonijah shall be put to death today. And he was. So he died for his deceit and for his rebellion. So these three deaths occurred, and it was upon these deaths that the kingdom and the throne of Solomon was established and was secured. So let's look at the kingdom now of Solomon that began from this, and how this was connected and built really upon these deaths. And really it's 4 deaths, because David had to die first for the throne to be empty for Solomon to take power. So if we look down to verse 46, it says there that the kingdom of Solomon was established before the Lord. It was established first of all by David's death. The old king had died before there was a new king. Makes sense. And Solomon honored his father's wishes. The things that David told him to do, he did. He honored his father. He obeyed his father as the commandments of the Lord required. And he obeyed his father's wishes even when he may have disagreed with him. I don't know if Solomon agreed with all of these things that David told him to do and how he told him to handle these situations. So he listened to his father, he honored him and obeyed him even when he may have disagreed with him, even when it was dangerous to him. What that means is that Solomon has proven himself here to be a humble and a respectful king, and that's a good way to start. Solomon's kingdom was also established through the death of Joab. Joab had also supported Adonijah, who was an enemy of Solomon. What Solomon did in killing Joab and executing him was he avenged the murder of innocents that Joab had perpetrated. In doing so, he upheld the law. Innocent blood had been spilled, and now it had required Joab's life. Even murder done in false service to David, in the mind of Joab, was still wrong. It was still evil. So in this action, Solomon has proven himself to be a just king. He is saying, in my kingdom, justice will be served. Even if it was something done with the intent of pleasing the king. Murder is still murder. Wrong is still wrong. So he is a just king. With the death of Shimei, he obeyed his father David when he said, do what you want with them. Use your own wisdom, but be careful. And he used that latitude to grant mercy. He didn't have Shimei killed. That would have been, the quick solution, I suppose. And he said, no, I'm going to put you under house arrest, and these are the conditions of that. And if you violate those, then you'll be killed. So the mercy that Solomon gave to Shimei was conditional. And eventually he did see justice done in the end. And that's the way it happens many times. Evil people often have a way of finding enough rope to hang themselves. And that's really what Shimei did. He had perfect opportunity to live out the rest of his life. But he was either forgetful or disobedient. And that cost him his life. even mercy is wasted on the stubborn and the wicked. As far as Solomon's part in this, he showed himself to be a merciful king, but also not a pushover, not a stupid man. Merciful, but still trusting and keeping to his word. Now, with the death of Adonijah, Solomon wasn't a fool to grant his request and say, oh, okay, no big deal. He understood what this meant. And he wasn't going to give one of his rivals ammunition to challenge him for the throne. Adonijah had proven himself even in the past to be a deceiver and a usurper, trying to steal the throne for himself. So the principle that we can take from this, like Solomon, is we need to trust people until they prove themselves to be untrustworthy. Adonijah certainly was. Solomon proves himself here to be a wise king who accepted counsel. He listened to what his mother told him about all this. But he's not gullible either. Solomon's kingdom had a violent beginning, but maybe it was necessary. But there is no doubt that the kingdom of Christ also had to be established with blood. It had to be established with his own blood. Let's look at Christ's kingdom now. Some similarities. Jesus also honored his Father's will, just as Solomon had honored David's will in these matters. And Jesus honored the Father's will to the point even when he was troubled by them and perhaps disagreed. I'm choosing my words very carefully here, but I think of Gethsemane when Jesus is praying and saying, Father, if there's any other way to accomplish this, let this cup pass from me. Even though he knew it couldn't, he was still pouring out his anxiety, his grief over this and the pain that was going to be coming, showing much of his humanity then. But he still said in the end, not my will, but thy will be done. Even when he was troubled, even when it put him in danger of death, he obeyed the will of his Father. And his eternal kingdom was founded on his own death, not on the death of his enemies. Just as Solomon exercised mercy, the kingdom of Christ was established in mercy. Not just blood, but also mercy. I want to turn back and cover a verse that I purposely left out until this point. Back in 1 Kings chapter 2 and verse 7. In these instructions that David was giving to Solomon, he wasn't just telling him all the people that needed killing. David said in verse 7, but show kindness to the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite, and let them be among those who eat at your table. For so they came to me when I fled from Absalom your brother. So these were people when David was run out of town. They helped David. They took him in. They gave him aid and support. He says, take care of them. They were good to me in my time of need. So David's last words to Solomon were not only about wrath and justice and revenge, but he was also teaching Solomon there about being a merciful king. Romans 11:22 remarks on the goodness and the severity of God. There are those two sides of God. He is a God of goodness to those who obey him and do his will and please him. And he is a God of severity to those who will disobey him. The king has both those sides as well. Justice must be done, but Jesus found a way to offer mercy. Similar to the way Solomon had found a way to honor his father's wishes with Shimei, that this is a man deserving of death, but he said, I'll just put him under arrest and see how he responds to that. Justice had to be done regarding sin. The price had to be paid. It was a death penalty. But Jesus found a way to offer mercy instead of exacting that penalty by taking the penalty himself. And just like Solomon, Jesus will follow through when men break their oath. When they are unfaithful, then the consequences will be paid if they will be unwilling to accept that mercy and abide by those conditions. We too must remain faithful to the King's commands. Let's finish up this evening by looking at how we might serve the King. Let's look at our service to the king. What do we do? What can we learn from this episode here? Well, in order to serve the king, in order to enter the kingdom, to receive forgiveness of our sin and be among the people of God and be in service to the king, we must die to self. Jesus has said as much. Well, that begins with a violent act. We have to die to our old sinful life. It's not a natural or an easy death, but it is a choice that we have to make or not make and abide by the consequences. Joab had some, I hesitate to even say well-intentioned action because they really weren't, but he thought he was serving the king by killing these men who might be a danger to him. Well, like Joab, we must not act in wrath or in false sense of service to the king. We shouldn't do wrong things in God's name. Joab's wicked acts cast a bad light on David. If we do the same, we can cast a bad light on our Heavenly Father. Even Paul, the Apostle Paul, admitted later in his life that he had done things that he thought was in service to the Lord. When he was persecuting the church, he said, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was serving and pleasing God. But he realized that he was, although he was sincere, he was sincerely wrong. So let us never malign the church or Christ. Let us never do anything that would reflect badly on our King. Well, like Shimei, we may get complacent over time or think that God's wrath against sin has weakened. Well, that's not such a big deal anymore. We may be tempted to break our oath. We may be tempted to become unfaithful or think God has forgotten about some things. In that case, we also would forfeit mercy and we must pay the price of disobedience. We can't ever do that. Like Adonijah, we may be tempted to take the throne for ourselves. Well, how could we do that? Christ is on the throne, and what we can do is we can place ourselves on the throne. And we can practice self-idolatry. That's just worshiping the desire. What I want is the most important thing in the world. That would be like Adonijah trying to usurp the throne. We saw what it got him. It won't get us any further. We must serve the king, but we must never try to become the king. Well, like David, each one of us at some point is going to go the way of all the earth in this life. And like Solomon, we must be strong and prove ourselves to be men and women of God. Well, that means following our Father's will. It means doing things we may find difficult or even dangerous. Joshua's final words to Israel when he was dying, when he was nearing the end of his life, were to reaffirm the promises of God that had been fulfilled. He said, here we are in this promised land that God has delivered to us, that he promised to give to us, and he's given it to us. Not one of the promises of God has failed, he said. He reaffirmed this for himself in his own mind and also for all those around him. Now, because our life will surely fade at one time, sooner or later, we must hold fast to the promise that God has made to us. What promise has he made to us? His Son is on the throne of heaven. Now, we may have acted in anger or jealousy in the past. We may have rejected God as the rightful ruler of our life. But the Father is acting through the Son to be merciful to us. Christ's heavenly kingdom also had to be built on death. Sin required our death. But Jesus stood in our place and he went to the cross himself. And because of that death, we are then able to reign with him on that throne, next to the throne, throughout all of eternity. So if you would take your part in that kingdom tonight by obeying the gospel, that you might receive forgiveness of your sins, that you might receive mercy and the blessings that God has in store for you. And we want to help you do that. Or if you need the prayers of the church, if you may be struggling with something, if you may be fighting a battle, let us help you with that. Let us offer our encouragement, our prayers, and our love to you. If you may be struggling with some matter, make that need known to us tonight. If you have that need, by coming forward as we stand and sing this song, please come.